Another Metroid 2 remake, or AM2R, is a case if you want something done right, do it yourself. AM2R did what nintendont, which was creating a modernized version of Metroid 2, akin to how Nintendo updated Metroid 1 with Metroid Zero Mission, which I've done a video on in the past. Metroid has been the neglected child in the Nintendo family for a number of years now. It's understandable due to the lower sales than Mario, Pokemon, or Zelda. But it has a devoted audience patiently waiting for the next Metroid title, whenever that is. With AM2R, we have a Metroid title that sits nicely in the Metroid library. As far as fan games go, is one of the best ever made. Before we dig into AM2R, I should know that beyond playing Metroid 2 on a Game Boy emulator for about 10 minutes years ago, I haven't touched the original or Nintendo's remake of Metroid 2, Metroid Samus Returns. How did AM2R come about? After the release of Metroid Zero Mission in 2004, some driven Metroid fans wanted to remake Metroid 2 in the same vein. A number of projects started to pop up. One of these projects came from Milton Guasti, aka Dr. M64. Hence the name Another Metroid 2 Remake, or AM2R. Made with Game Maker, Dr. M64 tinkered on AM2R on and off for about a decade, slowly making progress and creating a Metroid 2 in the style of Metroid Zero Mission. This included numerous quality of life improvements along with expanding the scope and adding more content, just like Zero Mission did. Through the years, more fans got involved in the project, and to coincide with the 30th anniversary of the Metroid franchise, AM2R was released on August 6, 2016. The aftermath of its release we'll talk about later, but let's now look at the game itself. There's a mostly predictable rhythm when it comes to how AM2R goes. We enter a new area, we're told how many Metroids are present in the area, and we go off to find them and dispose of them. Once we make our way through the Metroids, an earthquake will occur and a previously inaccessible area will become accessible. Why do these earthquakes happen? Who knows? AM2R addresses it in the logbook, saying that their source is unknown. Along the way, we'll be collecting abilities to allow us to reach areas that we couldn't before. Classic Metroid. Each area in AM2R is more or less independent of one another. Besides backtracking for missed power-ups later on, you don't need to return to them in regards to the critical path. Closer to the end of the game, there will be a warp room that allows us to quickly backtrack to previous areas to go collect missed power-ups. While AM2R can be challenging, there's not much incentive to return to previous areas unless you're a completionist. Pulling from the Prime series, Samus makes use of her scanner here for optional logbooks we could read for additional information on the world around us. Each area is well designed with different challenges for us to face. Some areas are lighter, some areas are more dark and atmospheric, while others can be more mysterious. To touch on the abilities here, we have our usual abilities that we come across in any Metroid game. One noticeable ability is the Spider Ball, which I was not aware was introduced in the original Metroid 2. I always thought it was in Metroid Prime. The Spider Ball really could have come in handy during Super Metroid or Fusion. There were a few times early on where my 2D Metroid instincts would kick in and I forget I had the Spider Ball ability. Granted, once we get the space jump, the Spider Ball mostly becomes redundant. On the note of the space jump, let's talk about the controls of AM2R. Samus has never handled better in a 2D Metroid. Super Metroid, Samus is very floaty. In Fusion or Zero Mission, I'd have various points where I miss a small platform due to the controls feeling a tiny bit off. In AM2R, just right. There are areas where we'll be navigating around spikes or staying in the air for an extended period of time with the space jump ability, and you always feel like you're in control, something which was not always the case in previous Metroids. I could see why Dr. M64 got hired to work at a studio that makes Metroidvanias, but more on that later. One of the core aspects of AM2R, as in the original Metroid 2, are the Metroid fights that take place. They're an interesting aspect of the game, but they can be a bit redundant. Earlier on, we'll encounter the Alpha Metroids, which go down with a handful of missiles. I found it easier just to tank them and shoot them rapidly in the stomach until they went down. Gamma Metroids take twice the amount of missiles. While they throw a few more wrenches your way, I still found it easier just to tank them while being under them to hit their underbelly. Finally, we have the Zeta and Omega Metroids, which have a lot more variety in their attacks, but this time are not flying around. The Omega Metroid, you have to be more precise with your aim. They're enjoyable fights with a number of attacks to deal with. The only problem is they're built like tanks and can take a long way to go down. In the initial release of AM2R, it took 40 missiles to take them down. Now it's 35. While I do enjoy the progress of clearing out the Metroids one by one, AM2R does suffer from the redundancy of these Metroid fights, and how the later Metroid fights are missile sponges. I think an interesting route would have been to reduce the number of Metroid encounters, but give them more unique arenas that require more thinking. Guests use some of our other abilities at our disposal to deal with them. Before we talk about the final Metroid, let's talk about the bosses. The boss fights of AM2R are the best among the 2D Metroids. The most noticeable bosses here are the Tester and the Chozo statue. With these fights, we're going to be spending most of our time in the air, and there is a dance to staying in the air and avoiding their attacks. The Tester boss is the standout of AM2R for its variety of attacks, how we have to be aware of the environment around us, and the satisfaction of pieces flying off as we destroy them one by one. Not only is this a highlight of AM2R, it's one of the more enjoyable bosses I played in quite some time. There's also the Chozo statue boss that starts out fairly simple, but then I know others have said this fight is cheesy, and it is, but it's a lot of fun. We have to deal with spikes on the ground, so we'll have to make use of our space jump to stay in the air. In other 2D Metroids, it's likely to have been very frustrating, but due to how tight the controls are in AM2R, it's a blast. The final boss, the Queen Metroid, while not as enjoyable as the previous two bosses I talked about, offers a nice challenge and progression, and a satisfying conclusion to AM2R. Before getting into the aftermath, let's talk about the music of AM2R. Metroid is well known for its quality tunes, and AM2R does not disappoint with it. A lot of these are remixes of previous Metroid tracks and modernized to include some of those samples from the Prime games. Here are some examples. And speaking of Prime samples, when I was doing research for this video, I stumbled across this video which I will link to in the description or the card here. There was a hip-hop sample CD called Uncivilized Grooves that laid the foundation for the rhythms of the Prime series soundtrack. So what happened with AM2R after its release in early August of 2016? Nintendo is well known for being extremely protective of its IP, and AM2R was no exception. A couple of days after its release, the team received DMCA notices from Nintendo, and Dr. M64 himself would receive a DMC notice in early September. Of course, when something is on the internet, it never goes away, and fans have updated AM2R to this day, now at version 1.5. And AM2R got a lot of attention, receiving high levels of praise from critics and fans. Nintendo was working on their own Metroid 2 remix, Samus Returns, since 2015, which was announced at E3 2017 and released in September of that year. So was it the fact that Nintendo was unaware of AM2R until its release, or someone else high up decided to hold off until it was released? Looking at Nintendo's history of fan projects, I'd wager they were well aware of AM2R prior to its release. Now, we've heard stories over the years of people getting hired at studios for creating mods or fan games, and Dr. M64 was no exception. In 2017, he started working at Moon Studios, creators of Ori and the Blind Forest, which I've done a video on here. He worked on Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which released in 2020 to great acclaim, and I look forward to playing in the near future. So if you're a fan of the Metroid series, Metroidvanias, fan projects, I'm sure you've already played AM2R at this point, but if you haven't, it's well worth your time, an example of a remake that takes the core of its original and improves on it without losing the heart.
Friends